I didn't expect that a quiet Sunday would change how I saw my family or myself. It started with a chair scraping across my kitchen floor and a pair of eyes that carried too much weight for their age. What he told me, what I learned about myself, still echoes in the hum of my old refrigerator and the way the afternoon light leans across this table. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. The clock above the sink ticked a steady, stubborn beat as my kettle rattled toward a boil. Outside, wind scratched the maple tree against the window, a soft fingernail on glass. When my nephew walked in, he didn't hug me right away like he used to. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, hands clasped, shoulders squared, like he was trying not to shiver though the house was warm. That was the first sign. The second was the way he breathed, slow, measured, as if he'd rehearsed staying calm. Coffee? I asked, and the word felt too small for the moment blooming between us. He nodded, eyes sliding to the far corner where the radio sat, still tuned to a station that plays old standards on Sundays. It was playing a song my late father liked, Brass and Velvet, and the memory curled quietly against my ribs. I set a cup in front of my nephew and another in front of me. He didn't reach for sugar. He didn't reach for anything. He just stared at the steam until it thinned and vanished. "You look tired," I said, keeping my voice gentle. 40-something, but there are days I feel older than the house. I've learned that men, no matter their age, sometimes need a soft landing more than a direct question. "I'm fine," he said, but the corners of his mouth trembled. In our family, that word is a door we shut when guests come by. Inside, the mess waits. He glanced at the window where the maple swayed. "Auntie, can we just sit for a minute?" "We can sit for as long as you like." We did. A full 60 ticks of the clock, 2 deep breaths, one sparrow tapping along the sill as if waiting to be let in. The kettle hissed again, though I'd already poured. That pointless sound got me moving. I tore open a pack of butter cookies and slid the plate toward him. He reached, then stopped, then reached again, as if even taking a cookie meant choosing a side he wasn't sure about. When he finally spoke, his voice was a little boy's voice in a grown man's throat. "I made a mistake," he said. The words fell like wrenches on tile. "I thought I could fix it, and then it got bigger. I didn't want Mom to know. I didn't want you to know either." The air between us stretched, thin as blown sugar. I resisted the urge to fix it with advice, with a checklist, with the kind of tidy solution you can put in a drawer. Instead, I placed my palm flat on the table. "You're here," I said. "That means you're already doing something right." He looked up, startled. It was the first time he met my eyes since he'd come in. They were red-rimmed and earnest, the way eyes are when the truth is finally too heavy to travel alone. "I'm not a bad person," he said. "I know," I answered, and I meant it. One thing age gives you is the ability to separate the person from the storm surrounding them. "Tell me what the storm looks like." He drew a breath, then another. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, one sharp note that felt oddly encouraging, like someone shouting from the bleachers just as the ball's in the air. He told me he'd borrowed money from a friend to cover a bill he'd misjudged. Then he borrowed more to repay the first. The friend had been patient, and then not, and then he'd made a choice that sounded smart in the moment and foolish by the time the sun came up. "It wasn't a crime," he said. "No laws broken, no one hurt, but it felt like one to him." This knot he tied around his own chest. As he spoke, I watched the small things. The way his thumb rubbed the edge of the saucer, the way he paused before saying his friend's name, The way he kept checking the door like shame might walk in uninvited. I remembered the year after my divorce when every envelope in the mail felt like a threat. I remembered the first time I told anyone I was scared. The relief didn't arrive like rain. It arrived like light through a keyhole, narrow but real. "Okay," I said when he'd finished. "Thank you for telling me." He blinked as if he expected something else. Anger, judgment, a lecture I admit I've given more than once. I folded my hands. "We're going to sort it. Not all at once, but we're going to sort it." "What if I mess it up again?" he asked. "Then you come back and we sort that too." A laugh escaped him, surprised and hoarse. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, leaving a damp crescent that darkened the fabric. "You always make it sound simple." "It isn't simple," I said. "It's just possible." He nodded, and some of the steel in his posture softened. Still, I could see the question hovering, the harder one, the one I knew I had to ask permission to hear. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yeah." "Do you want my help?" Consent is a small word that changes everything. I have learned not to strong-arm love. His shoulders sank in a way that wasn't defeat but relief. "Yes, please." "Then we'll write it down," I said, pushing the butter cookies aside to make room. "What's owed, to whom, and by when? We'll call who needs calling, and I'll sit right here while you speak. We'll make a plan that fits in your real life, not in a perfect one." He took the pen I offered. His hand trembled, then steadied. The radio crooned something warm and old. The wind eased and the maple leaves quieted. We wrote a name. We wrote a number. We wrote a date. They were just ink marks, but they felt like the first planks of a bridge. When we finished, he looked at the paper as if it were a passport. "I was scared you'd be disappointed in me," he said. "I'm proud of you," I answered, surprising myself with how quickly the truth rose. "Not because of what happened, but because you carried it to a table where it could be shared." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were clearer. He reached for a cookie without hesitating. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. "I think I'll need help making the call." "I'll have coffee ready," I said. And because I could feel the weight shifting inside both of us, I added, "And maybe we'll make pancakes. It's easier to be brave with something warm on a plate." He smiled, a real one, small at first and then generous, like a dawn deciding it might become a day. The clock ticked on. The kettle settled. The house felt a little bigger, as if it had stretched to hold this truth and found it could. What I didn't yet know was that the hardest part wasn't the phone call or the numbers. It was what his story would ask me to remember about my own, the choices I made years ago, and the apology I still owed myself. But that would come later. For now, the plan lay between us like a map, and his hand rested near mine on the table, not touching, just close enough to say we were in this together, step by ordinary step. The next morning arrived with a sky that seemed undecided, patches of pale blue breaking through a blanket of gray. I woke earlier than usual, the weight of yesterday's conversation lingering like a half-remembered dream. I brewed coffee, whisked pancake batter, and set the table with 2 plates. Each clink of the dishes was a reminder. Today would matter. When the knock finally came, it wasn't hurried. It was steady, polite, almost cautious. My nephew stepped in, his jacket unzipped, hair still damp from a rushed shower. He carried himself lighter than he had the day before, though the crease between his brows hadn't vanished. He glanced at the plates already waiting and gave me a small, almost boyish smile. "You meant it," he said. "Of course," I answered, sliding the pancakes onto the table. "Courage burns calories. You'll need these." We sat, and for a while it was quiet but not heavy. The kind of silence that comes when two people know what's ahead but agree to start gently. He drowned his stack in syrup, and I watched the way his hands didn't shake like yesterday. Progress shows itself in small tremors easing. When the plates were half empty, I nodded toward the phone sitting between us. "Are you ready?" He hesitated, fork still in hand. I practiced what to say last night, but my voice kept breaking. "That's all right," I said. "You don't have to sound perfect. You just have to sound like you." He breathed in deeply, then reached for the phone. I dialed the number for him, placing it on speaker so he wouldn't feel alone. While it rang, his eyes darted to mine, and I gave him a slow, deliberate nod, the kind you give someone stepping onto a thin bridge you know will hold. The friend's voice came through, brisk and guarded. My nephew stammered at first, his rehearsed lines collapsing into fragments. I could almost feel his pulse thudding against the table. So I whispered, one step at a time, "Just say thank you." He did. "Thank you for being patient with me," he said into the phone. His tone shifted, steadier, more genuine. He explained his plan, how he'd repay in smaller steps, how he'd keep communication open. I stayed silent, letting his words carry their own weight. By the time he hung up, his shoulders had sunk with exhaustion, but his lips curved into the smallest, proudest smile. "I didn't think he'd agree," he admitted. "People surprise us when we give them the chance," I said. He rubbed his palms together, then looked at me. "You know, Auntie, I almost didn't come yesterday. I thought maybe you'd see me differently forever." I leaned back, studying him. "You're right. I do see you differently, but not in the way you feared. I see a young man learning to stand in his own truth. That changes things, yes, but for the better." The room seemed warmer then, not from the stove or the coffee, but from the way his eyes softened. He picked at the last bite of pancake, lost in thought. Then, after a pause that felt heavy with something more, he asked, "Did you ever mess up like this? When you were my age?" I almost laughed, though not because it was funny. It was because memories came rushing in, sharper than I expected. The time I signed my name onto papers I didn't understand, the months of drowning in debts I was too ashamed to admit. I could feel the ghosts of those mistakes rising, asking to be named. "Yes," I said softly. "I did. And worse. I thought silence was strength back then. It wasn't. It was just loneliness in disguise." His gaze lingered on me, waiting for more. I realized then that this wasn't just about his burden. It was about mine, too. Sitting across from him, I understood that his confession had opened a door I had long kept locked, and walking through it meant more than helping him. It meant facing the shadows I had ignored for years. The kettle whistled again, and I poured us both another cup, the steam curling between us like a bridge being built. What neither of us realized yet was that this conversation would unravel more than just his secret. It would bring forward truths about my past I hadn't dared to revisit, truths that would test us both in the days to come. The third day came with sunlight spilling across the curtains, warm and insistent. I had slept lightly, dreams tugging me back to years I hadn't wanted to revisit. The conversation with my nephew had stirred more than just his struggle. It had loosened the knots I had tied around my own past. As I poured my first cup of coffee, I knew today would not just be about guiding him. It would be about finally unsealing pieces of myself I had hidden even from family. He arrived earlier than expected, his knock a quick rhythm on the door. When I opened it, he looked different, lighter but curious, as though yesterday had left him with more questions than answers. He carried a notebook under his arm, the kind you buy when you mean business. I couldn't help but smile. "You're taking this seriously," I said. "I figured if I wrote things down, it wouldn't spin in my head so much," he replied. We settled at the kitchen table, same as before. I had already set out toast and jam. The ritual of breakfast was becoming our way of softening the harder edges of conversation. He flipped open the notebook and showed me lists of what he owed, ideas for picking up more hours, even small sacrifices he thought he could make. His handwriting was cramped but determined. I praised him, but as I spoke, something heavy pressed on my chest. His earnestness reminded me too much of myself at his age, before I learned how much damage silence could do. I set down my mug and drew in a breath. "I think it's only fair I tell you something," I said. He looked up, startled. "About what?" "About me. About mistakes I made when I was younger. I don't want you to think you're alone in this." The words felt thick as I began. I told him about the time I had taken out loans I didn't fully understand, desperate to keep a roof over my head after the divorce. I told him about the late nights, the unopened letters piling on my counter, and the shame that kept me from asking for help. I nearly lost the house, I admitted, my voice catching. And I would have if a neighbor hadn't stepped in and reminded me that pride doesn't pay bills. He listened quietly, hands folded, eyes steady on mine. When I finished, the silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was reverent. "I never knew that," he said softly. "I didn't want anyone to know," I confessed. "But looking at you now, I realize hiding it never served me. It only made me lonelier." He leaned back in his chair, as though my admission had shifted something between us. "You don't know how much better that makes me feel. Not because you went through it, but because you're sitting here now, okay. You came through." "I did," I said. "And so will you." The clock ticked on, but time seemed gentler. We started working through his plan together, sketching out what repayment could look like in the weeks ahead. He asked questions, and for once, I didn't have all the answers, but I promised to help him find them. At one point, he paused, pencil hovering over the paper. "Auntie, were you scared back then? When you thought you might lose everything?" I nodded. Terrified, but fear isn't a reason to stop. It's a reason to move carefully, one step at a time. His shoulders eased, and he scribbled something down I couldn't quite read. Then he looked up and said something that startled me. "I think maybe this is happening for a reason. Maybe it's not just about money. Maybe it's about us talking like this." I swallowed the lump in my throat. He was right. For years, I had carried my stories like locked boxes, too heavy to share. Now, sitting across from him, I realized they weren't meant to be locked away. They were meant to be passed on, warnings and lessons, like lanterns lit on a dark path. Before he left that afternoon, he stood by the door and looked back at me. "Can I keep coming over like this, even after all this is behind me?" "Of course," I said. "This table isn't just for problems. It's for life." The door closed behind him, but the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the honesty we'd shared. Yet, as I cleared the dishes, I knew there was more I hadn't told him, chapters of my past darker than what I had revealed. The question wasn't whether he was ready to hear them. The question was whether I was ready to finally speak them aloud. The following morning, I found myself standing at the kitchen window long before my nephew arrived. The maple tree outside swayed in the crisp air, its leaves whispering like confidence. My hands rested on the sill, and I knew what had to be done. If I was asking him to be brave and honest, then I owed him the same. Today, I would open the door fully, not just a crack. When he came in, he carried the same notebook, though now it was bent at the corners, worn from use. He greeted me with a smile, still tentative, but freer than before. We sat as we always did, coffee between us, silence cushioning the moments before words found their way out. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice steady, though my palms were damp against the mug. "There's more I need to tell you, more than debts and mistakes." He leaned forward, sensing the shift. "You don't have to." "I do," I said, cutting gently across his protest. "Because if you're going to trust me with your truth, you deserve to know mine." I told him about the years after the divorce, when loneliness pressed in so tightly I thought I might collapse under it. How I made choices not just with money, but with people that weren't good for me. How I allowed fear and self-doubt to guide me down roads that left me weary and ashamed. I admitted that I had hidden those parts because I didn't want to be seen as weak. As I spoke, I watched his face. Not once did he flinch. Not once did judgment shadow his expression. Instead, his eyes stayed anchored on me, as if he understood that listening was its own kind of love. When I finished, the room was thick with quiet. My heart pounded, but then he reached across the table, his hand resting near mine, steady and sure. "Auntie," he said softly, "I don't see weakness. I see someone who survived, someone who knows what it's like to fall and get back up again." I felt the sting of tears, but this time I didn't push them away. I let them come, not as a sign of breaking, but as proof of release. The house, which for so long had held only my voice, now held his, too, and together, our truths echoed like a song that had been waiting years to be sung. We spent the rest of the afternoon not making lists or plans, but talking about resilience, about family, about how the hardest conversations often lead to the strongest bonds. He told me how hearing my past gave him courage, how it made him believe his own story could change course. I told him that healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning how to carry them without shame. As the sun began to dip, painting the kitchen in amber light, he stood to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back, his face clear, lighter than I had ever seen it. "You saved me, he said. I shook my head gently. "No, you saved yourself. I just reminded you that you didn't have to do it alone." The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there for a long while, letting the stillness settle. The maple tree outside caught the last of the light, its leaves shimmering like tiny flames. For the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't come from silence, but from being truly heard. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something profound. What had started as my nephew's burden had become our bridge. His honesty had unlocked mine. His fear had made me braver. And his willingness to sit across from me, vulnerable and raw, had given both of us a gift we never expected: hope. And hope, I thought, is what makes tomorrow possible. Always.